I'm Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, October 2nd.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
Be sure and hit the like and subscribe button. You'll get automatic notifications when we post the videos, typically on Sunday evenings. All right, let's get to work. Looking at significant wave heights for the North Pacific Ocean, we see a little gale trying to develop some seas in about the 18-foot range, targeting Hawaii pretty well, and some swell from this is expected to result. Otherwise, little bits of energy up in the Bering Sea, offering nothing, all landlocked by the Aleutian Islands, and some sort of a gale trying to organize off Japan, but not expected to do a whole lot. Let's get into the details. As usual, we'll start by looking at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales when they form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a dip in the jet, sort of like there, and a little bit better there. And what that helps do is create a counterclockwise flow aloft and down the ocean surface. That's a hallmark of low pressure. And low pressure, if it's strong enough, generates winds. Winds, if they're strong enough, generate seas. Seas, as they radiate away from the fetch area, eventually turn into swell. And swell, when it hits your beach, of course, turns into surf. All right, so the jet stream for October is actually pretty far to the north. Not unexpected given it's a La Nina year. It's running roughly around the 50 north latitude line. We'd expect it to be at least at 45, and if it was a good year, like an El Nino year, down at 40. And there's no real troughs. The Aleutian Islands are right there. The jet's pretty much running right over it. But we do have this cutoff low, that is, or cutoff trough. The main energy flow is up here. It's away from the main flow, still getting some little sideband energy, and that's helped creating low pressure, but nothing too exciting. As we move into Monday, October 3rd, the low sort of dissolves and just fades away, but a new legitimate trough starts forming in the northwestern Gulf of Alaska. It almost looks, it's like an appendage dripping down here. Most of the energy is up in the Bering Sea. There's a little bit of wind energy just drops down for a second, then blasts right off to the north. But that's enough to get the circulation going and maybe produce some low pressure. Then it, too, as we get into Wednesday, October 5th, it fully cuts off. The main flow is like heading up into North Canada or the Arctic Circle or something and just really doing nothing for us. The low continues, though, on Thursday, the 6th of October. And notice the winds, the strongest winds at 150 knots, are falling on the correct quadrant. That is, you want it in this west quadrant that produces north and northwest fetch, and that's exactly what we want. This will target Hawaii, it looks like, and then eventually the U.S. West Coast as we get into Saturday. And notice it's fully cut off. The flow is just racing off. Classic La Nina kind of pattern. And we get into Sunday, it reattaches. The low somehow manages to find the jet stream and looks like it's going to get sucked up and off to the races. All right, let's go take a look down at the ocean surface. Here we are, surface level pressure, surface level winds, and as expected, a little tiny low pressure system here, northeast of Hawaii. What is that? 3, 6, 9, about 1,000 miles northeast of the Hawaiian Islands. So for every 5 degrees north or south, it's 300 nautical miles. So you can just go 1, 2, 3, 4 times 3, 1,200, a little bit less, about 1,000 nautical miles. Winds northwest now. They were aimed more to at Hawaii, coming from the what would that be, the northeast, but the low starting to move off. Another little tiny low off Japan here, but we'll watch how this all sort of plays out. The low instantly as we get into Monday, even before sunrise, the low has gone off of Hawaii. This other low is hanging up here. And we do see this is the more interesting system getting into Tuesday, October 4th. We know the trough starts digging in here. Here comes the low pressure system. But this one aimed more at the U.S. West Coast, 30 to 35 knot winds, fading to 30 knots, and then rebuilding a little bit on Wednesday with 30 to 35 knot winds. But Hawaii is right here, so sideband energy certainly seems reasonable that it would reach into the Hawaiian Islands as well. The low continues south, fully cut off as we get into late Thursday and Friday. Still circulating, though, and then potentially more fetch on Friday at 35 knots, maybe even aimed better at the Hawaiian Islands. Then that fades out. It just sort of like pulses there as we get into Sunday, then finally starts fading on late Sunday, the 9th of October, with not a whole lot else going on in the North Pacific. So we're going to go back in time, exactly 24 hours, Saturday, the 1st of October. There was a little low, another one of these cutoff lows that developed right here northeast of Hawaii, 20 to 21 foot seas, targeting the islands pretty well, pretty much totally bypassing the U.S. West Coast. Now watch this. It forms, and the fetch itself actually falls southwest towards the Hawaiian Islands. So a little bit of early season swell is expected into the islands. I think it's on Tuesday, something like that. Nothing huge. Head high, maybe a little bit overhead, but nothing huge. Just something rideable. And then that gets us to today's date. Looking forward, that low fades out, but the new system starts developing courtesy of the trough in the northwestern Gulf with 20-foot seas building to 21.9 feet exactly, right where that little plus sign is. See the plus right there, and then there's an X over here. That's where the highest winds and the highest seas are in this entire domain. So 21.9 feet up here in the northwestern Gulf on Tuesday morning, falling south or southeast, continuing in about the 21-foot range, and then even continuing on to Wednesday, fading out Thursday from about 17 feet. But we know a little bit more energy is supposed to reorganize there. And here we go. Maybe, what is that, 18-foot seas over a tiny little area on Saturday, and then fading out as we get into Sunday. And nothing else in the North Pacific. For it being the early part of October, one would think there should be something more, but it's La Nina just doing its thing, just pushing the jet stream north, crushing the storm track, and again, none of this unexpected. Now we're going to take a quick look down south, southern Pacific, New Zealand, Australia, South and Central America here. Little gale formed under New Zealand. By little, it is little, barely 28-foot seas. This was on Saturday, yesterday, the 1st of October, and it pushed across the South Central Pacific with seas building to barely 31 feet. And then let's go look at the forecast. Here we are, 18Z Sunday, and that low fades out. Another one forecast southeast of New Zealand, just crashing right into the ice shelf, doing nothing. Another low forecast after that on Tuesday, Wednesday, the 5th of October, but all of it's supposed to just literally push right over New Zealand. New Zealand shadowing the entire swell relative to Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast. And then yet another gale forecast forming while falling hard southeast, pushing no energy north. This would be good for maybe Peru and Chile late season swell if it develops. Looks pretty good right now. Two model runs ago it didn't even exist, so not sure that we're believing any of this. And the reality is the southern hemi is pretty much done for the season. Maybe one last little pulse. Looking at local wind swell, California here, Hawaii here. There's the low pressure system currently sandwiched in between California and Hawaii. But that's cutting the wind out of any high pressure system. So just basically light trades, if you want to call it that, the northwesterly flow for the California coast, and trades from the northeast for the Hawaiian Islands and light. Another low pressure builds, same sort of pattern going. Yes, northwest winds do, high pressure northwest winds pick up a little bit along the California coast as we get into Wednesday, mainly northern California, 15, maybe 20 knots, and fading from there. So no real wind swell. But here's that big load. And look at this, relative to Hawaii, looks pretty close, if nothing else. A good amount of north wind swell will assume this happens. And if these winds build to 35 knots, then potentially bigger north-angled swell for the Hawaiian Islands. Still, period, given the winds are only 30 to 35 knots, we're talking 13, maybe 14-second period. So nothing too impressive. Again, if if it was an El Nino year in mid-August, we should have already been seeing swell from the North Pacific, and here it is. We're getting into the 1st of October, and really nothing of any significance has occurred. Looking at the snow forecast dashboard for the Pacific Crest Trail and Tioga Pass Road intersection, so there is signs of little bits of snow, like what's that, maybe a half an inch or something way out there, but it is not due to any, it's more like a monsoon flow that backfills over the Sierra, if you even believe it. So otherwise, even up into British Columbia, no rainfall of any magnitude and no snowfall of any magnitude is expected for the next 10 days. So a dry pattern is in control. The snow level, freezing level, today about 12,500 feet and expected to hold, but then you see it slowly starting to dip down to about the 10,005 range as we get into October 9th and 10th, something like that. So a little bit at a time, the fall pattern is trying to settle in. Temperatures are slowly starting to work their way down. That is, colder temperatures working their way down to the surface. But still, we have a ways to go. The La Nina thing, especially when you're in the second or maybe even a third year of La Nina, it is not unusual to see the seasons completely displaced, especially the start of fall, by a month or more, and that's exactly what is happening. All right, let's go take a look long term. What's going on with the Madden Julian Oscillation and the El Nino Southern Oscillation? These two oscillations are the best determiners for what's going to happen in the 6-week to 2-year time period for the Pacific Ocean. As usual, we start by looking for signs of the active phase of the MJO, that periodic weather oscillation that traverses the planet. There's two phases, active and an inactive phase. The active phase is like a low-pressure system. The inactive phase, high-pressure system. They travel west to east on the equator around the planet from west to east. Active phase on one side of the planet, inactive phase on the other. They rotate around. When the active phase moves over the Pacific, again, it being like a low-pressure system, it starts spewing energy, wind energy, or latent heat energy up into the upper levels of the atmosphere. That in turn feeds energy to the jet stream. The jet stream gets invigorated. That feeds energy to the storms and supports storm formation. Also, when it's in the West Pacific, because it's low pressure, it tends to dampen trade winds. Trade winds flow on the equator from east to west, but the active phase of the MJO can, if not dampen the trade winds, can actually cause them to reverse, and that can take warm water that's pulled up in the West Pacific, typically driven there by trades. If the trades slacken, the warm water starts pushing off to the east. And that in turn can help create a thing known as a Kelvin wave, a ball of warm water. The warm water in the West Pacific doesn't actually track east on the equator on the surface. It tracks east under the equator. That ball of warm water takes 3 months to make it from the West Pacific to the East Pacific, and then eventually erupts somewhere around the Galapagos and Ecuador. If you have successive active phases of the MJO, successive westerly anomalies, you get successive Kelvin waves, and that can either be a sign or help kick off El Nino. So we're very interested in the active phase of the MJO. So we start by looking for signs of the active phase of the MJO by looking at wind data on the equator. This is the East Pacific here. This is the West Pacific. Data from the TAA buoy array, a series of buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino. They have wind sensors on them, so that gives us a good idea of what's going on with the winds. We're just looking at the arrows. The stronger and longer the arrows are, well, this looks like strong trade winds in the East Pacific, strong trade winds in the Central Pacific, and strong trade winds in the all-important Kelvin wave generation area of the West Pacific. When the active phase is over here, that's where all the magic happens. But it's not the actual wind speeds, it's the anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year. And we see little tiny arrows out of the east, meaning weak easterly anomalies, probably the inactive phase of the MJ. Over the Central Pacific, easterly anomalies as well. And in the West Pacific, the Kelvin wave generation area, stronger than normal easterly winds. So all this looks like the inactive phase of the MJO in control. So let's go look a week out. What's going on? So this is, again, 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies. That's up about 4,700 feet. It's the blues and purples are easterly anomalies. Think of that as the inactive phase, the MJO. The reds, yellows, westerly anomalies. We want to see the westerly anomalies in the Pacific. But let's get ourselves oriented. This is the whole planet on one chart. All of the oceans covered. The date line runs right up the middle. Far west Pacific starts about 135 east, so right here. And this is past performance up here. So the area we're interested in, the West Pacific, is right here. And all we see is blues and purples for the next, this is a week. Now, it looks like it's going to start fading maybe the last day of the week. So next Sunday when we do our video, maybe we'll have better news to tell you. But for right now, it looks like strong easterly anomalies in control, westerly anomalies balled up and just locked in place over the maritime continent. That's like Bali in that area, not able to make it into the Pacific, at least not yet. We found a new website here that now shows the GFS 24-hour 950 millibar zonal wind anomaly. So that's really close to the surface, about a couple hundred feet, something like that. And same sort of deal. The blues, purples, easterly anomalies. The reds and oranges, westerly anomalies. New Guinea is right there. The equator right here. We're only interested 5 degrees north and south of the equator. And really, if you were to be picky, only in this area right about here, but we'll look at the whole, you can see the whole Pacific Ocean. This goes out, what, about 2 weeks, something like that. You can just see steady easterly anomalies. I'm just going to blast through this thing so you get the idea. Easterly anomalies in control. Yes, you get some sort of tropical development or something, but easterly anomalies holding. But then when you get to the end of the model, this is kind of interesting, but it looks like in this giant area here, the extent and the power of the easterly anomalies start fading. Yes, a new little pulse starts developing the very end of the model. This is out, 2 weeks out. Oh, here we go. October 18th. But it looks like easterly anomalies, theoretically, starting to fade. And then here's another model, goes out 2 weeks, outgoing long-wave radiation. If the active phase of the MJO is a low-pressure system, then clouds would be associated with it. The inactive phase is a high-pressure system, so it would basically clear out clouds. This model predicts cloud cover, and the blues are cloudier than normal skies, less sunlight reflectivity off the ocean surface. So here we are today. Oh, and 4 different panels, 5 days each panel. South America, Central America, Hawaii, New Guinea here. Kelvin Wave generation area, the area we're interested in, right in here. So not a whole lot going on today, but a weak active phase forecast building 5 days out, building stronger 10 days out, and in control of the Kelvin Wave generation area 2 weeks from now, according to the statistic model. The dynamic model pretty much showing the same thing. Maybe the active phase not quite as strong as the statistic model suggests, but either way, active phase in control starting about 2 weeks from now. That's a good thing. Phase diagrams, a deeper dive into the exact same thing. Statistic model here, dynamic model, same models. The MJO moves from west to east, from the Indian Ocean to the maritime continent, to the West Pacific, to the East Pacific, under the United States, across the Atlantic, over Africa, back to the Indian Ocean. The solid dot is where the active phase is right now. So somewhere in the West Maritime continent, so maybe over there, Java or something like that, or the Mentawai Islands, something like that. The forecast tracks 3 different tracks, but one of them suggests the active phase 2 weeks from now, pushing into the West Pacific and at moderate strength. The dynamic model also suggesting the same thing, but only, I will say, very modest strength. The further these dots are outside of this circle, the stronger the active phase is. So you want to see the dots up in here. We clearly don't see that, but anything, this is the closest we've seen to something that looks semi-real in months and months and months. So we'll take anything we can get. Next up, the upper level model. This is up jet stream level. Areas favorable for precipitation. The green's favorable for precipitation. One can loosely interpret that as the active phase of the MJO. The oranges and the yellows, the inactive phase, dry air. So there's 8 different panels, 5 days per panel. South America, Central America, the equator right there. Date line roughly there. New Guinea there. The active phase of the MJO, let's see, right there. There's the Mentawais and Java in that area. Active phase right there. Slowly starting to bleed into the Pacific starting October 12th and continuing the whole way across and still not out of the Pacific at the end of the model. This is 40 days out, November 11th. A weak inactive phase following starting now the 1st of November and making its way east. But we'll see how strong that is. Now, the interesting part here is if you follow these videos, for months there's been this rumored active phase, a transitional active phase of the MJO pushing over the Pacific in October. This model, completely unrelated to the CF model that was predicting it, is now suggesting that too. This is a statistic model. In fact, the statistic model, the dynamic model, upper level, lower level, they all look like they're starting to line up for some sort of interesting activity in October. So as we continue on, keep that in the back of your mind. The CFS model going out 1 month. Whole planet on one chart. Again, east-west component of the wind. The blues, easterly anomalies, the inactive phase. The reds, the active phase. You can see clear. Oh, we'll just do this. The date line right here. Kelvin Wave generation area. West Pacific starts about 135 east to 170 west. So right in there. That's the key thing. You can see the preponderance of easterly anomalies. It's not just the inactive phase. So here's active phase, inactive phase. Very well set up and defined over the Indian Ocean and the maritime continent. As soon as you hit the Pacific, it's like hitting a brick wall and nothing can penetrate. That's because of the presence of La Nina. Now, so here we are today, inactive phase of the MJO, constructively integrating with the La Nina base state, creating easterly anomalies. And you can see it sliding across for about the next week or so, creating another little patch of easterly anomalies about from October 7th to about the 15th, something like that. But then this active phase of the MJO that's forecast, and you see westerly anomalies starting to work their way midway through the Kelvin Wave generation area by the end of October. And this is probably the more conservative rendering of this model. Here is the CFS model going out 3 months. Now, past activity is on the bottom. The forecast is up here. Kelvin Wave generation area, the date line runs right up the middle. Kelvin Wave generation area starts right about here. So it's this area, looking in the past, and all you see is east anomalies. Then looking forward, again, this pattern change that we've been talking about for a month or two, still manifest on the model. You see easterly anomalies giving way as we get into the latter part of October, with westerly anomalies slowly filling to the date line and then the whole way almost to California as we get into the first part of November. Let's overlay the MJO just to get a sense of what's going on. All right, dotted contour is the inactive phase of the MJO. It is in control. This is today's date right here, October 2nd. So it's supposed to hold over the Kelvin Wave generation area till about the 15th of October, something like that. It fades, easterly anomalies persist, but here comes that active phase of the MJO that's currently over the maritime continent, working its way into the Pacific starting maybe about the 11th or 12th of October, and then pushing to the date line by the 20th of October. Westerly anomalies lagging behind as they usually do, but encroaching into the Pacific, filling the whole way to the date line as we get to about Halloween. That is the key date we're watching for. And then after that, westerly anomalies continue to build. And then the inactive phase of the MJO comes in behind that in the early part of November. But westerly anomalies persist the whole time. So again, this is this one big active phase that we've been watching that we think is a bellwether for a change, a significant change in the weather pattern for the Pacific moving forward. Now, let's overlay the low pass filter, the high pressure, low pressure bias. Dotted contour is the high pressure bias, the La Nina signal. two contour lines today. You can see it here, filling the dateline region. The low pressure bias, the El Nino, this is the La Nina, this is the El Nino bias, right over the maritime continent. And the edge of these two, if anything, the La Nina pattern is to get a little bit stronger and fill a little bit more of the Kelvin wave generation area into about October 15th. But after that, notice the leading edge or the trailing edge of the La Nina indicator. It starts giving up territory. The El Nino low pressure bias starts building into the Pacific. And notice this is the first time we saw it just today. The high pressure bias completely dissipates by December 21st. We've been talking about this for months now, sort of trying to read the tea leaves, trying to guess what's going to happen. And now the model's literally saying it, that as we get into the end of December, if you believe the model, La Nina literally is going to fade, and not El Nino, but at least a neutral pattern takes over with westerly anomalies in control. That should pretty much then start the process of washing, of trades returning to normal, and the cold water pattern that's been in control of the equator starting to dissipate beyond. All this is super good news if you believe the model. All right, so that's the atmospheric forecast. What's going on in the ocean? That's key. It is the interaction of the ocean and the atmosphere that determine either La Nina or El Nino. So we're going to start again by looking at data from the TAA buoy array, the series of buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino. These are the anchor lines. These little X's here, or actually, these are the anchor lines themselves. The X's are sensors on the anchor lines for the buoys. The sensors collect data, send it to a central processing facility, you apply a model, fill in the gaps. Notice there's 600-800 mile gaps between each of these lines. So you sort of try to tease out what the profile of warm water is. When all your warm water is balled up in the west, that's pretty much La Nina. It'd be driven by strong trades taking warm water, pushing it there. But if the warm water starts pushing off to the east, then one, either you have a Kelvin wave, or two, maybe La Nina is fading. Right now, the 29-degree isotherm doesn't exist. The 28-degree isotherm, I think it was back about 172 last week, maybe making a little bit of eastward headway, but again, it's all just made-up data between these two sets of sensors here. So we'll say 175 east, it's moving a little bit. The 26-degree isotherm, it was back at 155 last week. It's moving to 148, so that's kind of good news. And the 24-degree isotherm, I think it was back a little bit too, but it's trying to move off to the east slightly, not a lot. But it's not the actual water temperatures, it's the anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year that really make the difference. Warm water, as you can see, it balled up in the west, but last week it was, the dividing line was 155 west. So right here, you see that warm water maybe making a little bit of headway. And cold water that was like rock solid right here is starting to move off to the east, at least according to this model, and getting weaker. What that suggests perhaps is that trades maybe are fading just a little bit, or maybe there's just a little bit of westerly anomalies here or something, but it appears something is changing. The high-res version model, using a little bit different data, suggests the dividing line right here is also about 155, 150. Now this lags about a week behind. See, this is September 25th data, and we're a week beyond that. So this is still showing the old thing, but whenever this updates, we expect to see this the warm water sliding off to the east a little bit. And why do we say that? Because that previous model we just looked at gets a lot of its data from the sea level anomaly data set right here. And this is key. So what are we looking at? Chile, Peru, equator, dateline right there, Central America, Hawaii is right there, New Guinea there. This is not sea surface temperatures or down in the ocean temperatures. It's the height of the ocean. That is the sphere of the ocean higher or lower than normal? If you have cold water at depth, it contracts. The ocean creates a divot on the surface to fill that gap. If you have warm water at depth, it expands. It'll create a bump on the ocean surface. So we have plus 15, plus 20, plus 25 or even 30 centimeter anomalies here in the far west Pacific, warm water here. Now, we have cold water, minus 10 centimeter anomalies right here. But last week, I think we had 1 or even 2 pockets of minus 15 centimeter anomalies. They're gone now, and this definitely gives you the impression, if you sort of follow this daily, that the colder anomalies that are here either aren't as cold or they're starting to move off to the east. Either way, that's good news. Also, the leading edge, the 0 degree line, was back at 165 a week ago. It's to the date line, and the dividing line between neutral water and cold water is now at 150 west. So something is definitely changing. Upper ocean heat anomaly chart. Temperatures of the ocean down in the upper 300 meters of the ocean surface. West Pacific here, East Pacific here. Time going back a year, October 2021. You see the reds, warmer than normal temperatures, building pretty well in the West Pacific. This was the second of 3 pulses that started last July. 1, 2, 3. Kelvin Wave, warm water pushing across the Pacific back in December, driven by the active phase of the MJO. Another upwelling event. This was in March 2022. Increased trades. Another 1, 2 active phases of the MJO it took to create a weak Kelvin wave that didn't even make it across the Pacific. And yet another upwelling event. But you look here, just today, you see the thickness of this area getting thinner, and the leading edge starting to push off to the east, and warmer water starting to push to the east. You see the colder water building off to the east. See how this one faded? It was here, and over time it slowly moved to the east, got off Ecuador, all sort of upwelled to the surface like a cold water Kelvin wave, and then died. We think that transition is starting here, and given everything else we're seeing, it just makes perfect sense. Now, that was all subsurface data. What's going on at the surface? I mean, it looks pretty doom and gloom at the moment, all right? You know this chart. South America, Chile, Peru, Ecuador right there, the Galapagos there, Central America, Hawaii, Equator right there. Colder than normal waters, classic La Nina signature, with a much upwelling event happening right here in the Galapagos. But we think these much colder than normal temperatures, and this is colder than last week by a good margin, are being driven by whatever warm water is starting to push off to the east, and the cold pool that's subsurface here, it's starting to get squeezed to the surface. So in reality, though this looks horrible, it actually could be the sign of something good happen. That could be this cool water here getting pressured by this warm water here and starting to squeeze it to the surface. See the line of travel right there, about 100, somewhere around 100 west? Well, there's 100 west right there, right on cue. So, potentially, and again, we're only like a couple days into this, but potentially, maybe some of that cold water is starting to get squeezed to the surface, and some of the warm water is starting to ease off to the east. Sea surface temperature trend for the past 7 days. Well, last week this was all lit up, just dark blue and cold water in control. Now all of a sudden, yes, we have cold water right there, but we do have some warming, sort of a neutral trend, at least for the moment. And then the backed off view, same thing. Clear La Nina signature. No one's saying we're anywhere but La Nina at the moment. With the upwelling here, what we're really looking for is signs of the demise, the potential demise of La Nina. Remember, we looked at the models saying that this active phase, the MJO, is starting to push over this area. Look at all that warm water. It's really only 5 degrees north and south of the equator that we're interested in. All that warmer than normal water there. You get the active phase, the MJO, pushing over here, and that would be ripe for production of a Kelvin wave, and that would then eventually start cutting into this blue pool, turning it neutral. Sea surface temperature trend for the Nino 3.4 region. So the regular site we used to go to get this data, they've been having problems just the past week or so. I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but we can get the data here just as easily. This is the actual temperatures, And here's the anomaly trend. All right, so temperatures have been falling into mid-August. September, they bottom out. But notice the past 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days, temperatures are starting to work their way up. Still cold. Today, we're at 792 thousandths of a degree below normal. The threshold for La Nina is half a degree, so we're still a ways off from that, but at least it's trending in the right direction. So what is going on in the atmosphere and its relationship with the ocean? Is pressure lowering in the Pacific at all, or are we still locked down by high pressure? So we have the Southern Oscillation Index. It just shows the difference in pressure between Tahiti, which is in the Pacific, and Darwin, which is roughly in the Indian Ocean. You integrate the two numbers, you get an index. Today's value plus 8.18. If it's positive, that means pressure is higher than normal in Tahiti. If the index is negative, that means it's lower in Tahiti. At positive, we're clearly in the inactive phase of the MJ. Look at this, we were up at 35.3 about 5 days ago, and we've been positive for quite a while now. The 30-day average takes some of the noise out of this, but still, we're up at 18.36. We were up at 19.66 5 days ago, and that is certainly up from 7.93. So clearly in the middle of the inactive phase of the MJO at a minimum. The 90-day average takes all that out and just it's your El Nino La Nina indicator. Today's value plus 11.72 and pretty much unchanged for the past month. Clearly in La Nina, but not getting any stronger. Here's the 30-day SOI graphed out. Here we are today, pushing up, what we said, 18.5 or something like that. Back January 2020 was the last time we saw anything that was even neutral or like El Nino-ish. So it's been, what is that, 2.5 years, something like that. Big peak of La Nina, January 2021. Another peak delayed in April or May of 2022. And still, we're just banging right up against the ceiling. Here's the ceiling about 20, really not making any move atmospherically yet away from that, driven all by that cold water deep in the Pacific, both down in the Pacific and at the surface. But again, we think something's coming to make that change. Here's raw data from the CFS version 2 model, sea surface temperature forecast for the Nino 3.4 region, the official El Nino monitoring region. It's just 5 degrees north and south of the equator from the area south of California out to about the date line. So you can see temperatures. Well, here's the La Nina threshold. We're going back a year. Temperatures have been just below that threshold, about 1 degree below normal. And according to the model, as we get to October 15th, they're supposed to dip even colder. Now, this is raw data. But then after we get mid-October, a slow, steady warm-up starts. And by the time we're into mid-February or later February, temperatures are supposed to be above the La Nina threshold and then even neutral, pushing towards the El Nino threshold as we get into early part of next summer. Now, this is the raw data. The PDF corrected version, probably the more official, says we're about as cold as we're going to be, about 1 degree, maybe 1.1 degrees below normal in October. And then again, starting that slow warm-up and above La Nina threshold late in February into neutral territory and heading up from there. So, we're kind of on pins and needles here. We're poised for a change if you believe the models. The real question is, will it happen or not? All the models, dynamic, statistic, and a bunch of other data suggest that some change is going to start happening with this impending arrival of the active phase of the MJO, we'll say in mid-October. And by the end of October, westerly anomalies are supposed to be taking over the entire Kelvin Wave generation area, and then building from there, working to take over the entire Equatorial Pacific. And that surely would, if it happens, would be the death knell to La Nina. Now the question is, how quickly will those cold water temperatures on the Equatorial Pacific abate? That's still up for debate. The models suggest somewhere in the January-February timeframe. Clearly, The earlier it happens, the better, because then the jet stream will respond to that. Even the active phase of the MJO pushing into the West Pacific will help stimulate the jet stream some, but if you can get that cold water out of there and let the westerly anomalies get further progress across the Pacific, then that will yet further invigorate the jet stream. We're still thinking by late January, early February, a significant change in the weather pattern should start becoming evident if all this plays out. You've heard this before, and that the jet stream will respond, the storm track will wake up, we'll start getting surf, and that maybe even we'll start getting some snow and rainfall into California, and by mid-winter, we'll say late February, early March, just the start of spring, we could maybe be in business. The question is, will it happen? Do you believe the models? And will we get precipitation, and will we get the storms out of that? Too early to know, but certainly right now, this big turning point, the October 15th to October 30th time period, we're 2 to 4 weeks out from it, and all the models, they've been saying it for 2 months, 3 months. We're right close to that actually happening. So at this point, we're going to not say too much, keep our fingers crossed, and hope that things materialize as we are thinking they might. All right, so other than that, yeah, a little bit of swell forecast for the next week or so, waiting for the North Pacific to come online, but wouldn't be surprised if it's still another 2 to 3 weeks out. Say, go take care of business now. Go do whatever chores you got to do. But I think by the 3rd week in October, maybe we'll start seeing something that looks like a real fall pattern. All right, if you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. We appreciate it. Like and subscribe. Comments always welcome. If you don't understand something, there's 10 other people that don't understand either. We'll be happy to reply. We try to reply pretty quickly, so just give us a comment down below. All right, and other than that, we're going to do this again next week, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, and we'll see you on next Sunday.